Hey, guys and dolls. Before we jump into this episode, a note about our content today. This is created for adult audiences only. We advise listener discretion. So if you need a breather, take a break and come back later. This is your Pain Game podcast, where we talk about the game of living in and with chronic pain and trauma, getting to the heart of how to heal. I am your host, Lyndsay Soprano. On this show, I plan on discussing with doctors, chronic pain patients, holistic practitioners, loved ones, and anybody that is interested in having their voice heard in the chronic pain and trauma world that we live in. I have always been a very sexual human being from a very young age. I love it. I love sex. I love it a little rough. I love it soft and intimate. I love expressing myself through the act of sex, but I would never consider myself to be like a sex addict per se. I've enjoyed it in my long-term relationships, with the majority of my relationships have been fairly long-term. But I also, to be completely honest, I have also been in some pretty shady places and have had some promiscuity issues, right, growing up, some of which I'm proud of and some of which I am not, right? And I know a lot of the reason why promiscuity came into play for me. And that is one word. And we've all heard it on this show, and we're going to hear it on this episode, and we're going to continue to hear it. And that's trauma. And as we've spoken about it time and time again, as an adult, it kind of feels sometimes like using trauma as an excuse for our young adulthood, or even our behavior now as grown-up adults, if we can call ourselves adults. Like, let's get real. Are we really adulting? Like, no. But I feel like sometimes it's kind of, people might feel like it's a cop-out to blame it on past traumas. And that is complete bullshit. So that's the first thing I want to make sure that everybody is listening to today. Please do not feel shame. Please do not live in fear of people judging you anymore. Just don't do it. It's not good for you, and it's not good for me, and it's not good for anybody around you, right? We all have faltered. We all have failed. We've all made bad decisions. We've all let ourselves down, blah, 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 right? And we can all be sad about it and mopey about it and make piss poor decisions going forward because of that. Or we can choose to channel it in a better way, in a more healthy and productive way for our lives that can shift our mindset to be much more positive for our world and our environment, right? Because remember, there is hope. That's one of the messages that we always talk about on this show, is there is hope through the messiness that, trauma causes and has caused. When it comes to my sex life, as I mentioned, I am an uber sexual being, always have been. And one thing that I never got into, though, was pornography. And my friends and my sweetie know this, but I always say, I am my own porn star. I don't need porn. I'm my own porn star. And I am fortunate and grateful that I have a very sexy and healthy sex life, fun, exciting. I'm so grateful for it with my sweetie. But porn, like I mentioned, has never played a role in my life. But for my guest today, it has played an enormous role in his life. And he is here to share his message of hope and success from porn addiction. So let's talk about it, baby. So without further ado, I'd like to introduce you to my guest today, J.K. Emezi. Amazing he is.
Thank you for having me on, Lyndsay. And you are probably the first person who's interviewed me who just nailed the name, even while guessing it, during housekeeping. So
thank you.
I am impressed. I'm excited to be here and talk about this. This is going to be interesting.
It is very well said, my darling. I'm blessed to have you here and grateful because this is going to be fun and interesting.
Thank you.
He is going to share his inspiring and motivational story of, rising from poverty and addiction, low self-esteem, which we just talked about a little bit, from going from depression to happiness, from freedom from his addiction and health and financial success. This man is insane. He's a 7-figure entrepreneur, runs Elevated Recovery, which is an addiction recovery service, as well as the Porn Reboot program, the most successful addiction recovery system for men struggling with porn addiction. He runs multiple brands such as Optimum You. It's a program for addiction to getting fit and healthy while recovering from porn addiction. The Dating Reboot program for men seeking to learn how to date and develop healthy sexual intimacy, which is really interesting. And the Financial Reboot program, which helps recovered sex and porn addicts manage their finances and generate wealth. And he has a podcast, the Porn Reboot podcast, and also has written a book, The 7 Secrets of Porn-Free Men. I am exhausted just saying all of those things. So I'm rolling out the red carpet for you, babe. I'd like to start with your struggles with your addiction to online pornography and how being exposed to it at such a young age led to being consumed by the addiction. And let's just take it from there because we've got a lot to cover here.
We do have quite a bit to cover. And thank you for that, that amazing intro. Pornography. Well, I got exposed to it when I was 8 years old. We had a family member who was also a nanny. And I've always been a big fan of comic books, very imaginative. And I was a voracious reader. I had read everything in the house and I really wanted to read that comic. But she wouldn't let me. I'm tenacious as well. And it took me a while, but finally I figured out where she was hiding that comic book. And it was a pornographic a comic book. I don't even want to share I don't want to trigger anyone, but I don't even know what the theme of your podcast is and how sexual you get with things.
Go with it, babe.
it was pornographic material. And being 8 years old, I grew up in a conservative household. I knew that it was quote unquote wrong. But the moment I looked at it, Lyndsay, I had it was as if there was this chemical explosion in my brain. Something happened to my nervous system. And it's very interesting because being conservative, this is wrong. This is bad. So there's adrenaline, there's fear of being caught, but there's also this curiosity of a child. I want to know more. But then there was the theme of it. I'll just share the theme here. This is probably I would say this is the least conservative podcast I've been on in a while. The theme was this young man gets married, and it doesn't start like that. It starts out very innocently with a man getting married, his father being so proud of him. And it goes on like this for a couple of pages. And then halfway through, he brings his bride home and leaves. And then it gets super sexual where the dad starts having, the dad and his new bride start having sex. And even mentioning it now is just triggering some things because I haven't shared this story in a very long time. I don't think I've even shared it on my podcast. And they start having sex. So it's also destroying the concepts of marriage for me that my conservative parents had drilled into my head. I hid it, but in that moment, something changed for me. From then onwards, anytime I experienced a strong emotion that I wanted to escape from, I would run. I would find a way to recreate that state of adrenaline, that rush, just to get myself out of whatever it was, sadness, parents angry at me, not doing well in school. And the only way I knew how to recreate it was by seeking something of a sexual nature. Now, mind you, none of this was arousal. At that point, I wasn't capable of physical sexual arousal. And that continued till I was about 13 years old and learned how to masturbate. And then I made the connection. I was like, so I can seek more than just adrenaline from this. There's this intense, almost spiritual, like ecstasy that I can experience from it. And that set me down a path of basically chasing my endogenous opiates for the next decade of my life.
Well, 8 years old. Wow. I mean, I remember like you're talking about triggering stuff. Like I remember my birth father and my stepmother. My stepmother was this very sexual being. She was this person that came into my world that was not my mom. And she was chosen over me and my mom. And so I was always, wow, this is coming out of like the cobwebs right now. Holy crap. But she was this representation of this person that I wasn't and that my mom wasn't, but my dad really loved her. And I would always like go through all of her stuff and she had sexy lingerie like all over the place and I would steal all of it. Like I would take all of it. And it was one of those things for me that kind of started me going down an interesting sexuality role in my life with my sexuality and how I felt about my body and how I felt about myself. It was like my own version of like I walked in on them having sex. Like there was weird stuff that happened. And I think back about how all of those little tiny things at one instance, it doesn't mean that much, but when they all add up over time, it framed like who I thought I needed to be. And I needed to be her. And so I took my sexuality in like my own weird way in regards to like her modeling very bad behavior, quite frankly. But it's so interesting at such a young age, how we form these, like you said, your brain just like popped off and you're like, whoa. And that's exactly the feeling that I had, that adrenaline, that I could be someone like her, that my dad would actually love because I'm not it. As sad as that is. Gosh.
Oh my goodness.
Yeah.
Well, sad as it may be, I think it's the reality. I like to call it our arousal templates. And it's always interesting to go back and understand. I like how you said, just kind of pulling it out of the cobwebs. We can go to therapy and we can talk about all sorts of things, but you can sit with someone and have a conversation and they ask a question and they just prompt you like, oh crap.
Yeah.
I didn't,
Like
I
literally,
wasn't
I
ready
got a
for
like
that.
tingle in my bottom when you were talking, and I was like, I'm unsure what this tingle is all about right now.
You're like, what's this? What's happening?
Is this a good one or is this a bad one? So, okay, so you're this young kid, you're between 8 and 13 years old. So now what happens when you're 13 and you've experienced this, you start masturbating, you understand this euphoric feeling that you didn't make any connections with. So what happened from there?
I start using it as a coping mechanism for everything. It is the most pleasurable thing in my life at that moment, and it becomes an escape. Now, of course, at the same time, there are multiple things happening in my life. My mom and my dad start having issues. She moves to a different country to work. So I'm dealing with these abandonment issues. We're latchkey kids and we have to come home and we're not allowed to leave the house. But I begin to use this as a coping strategy for all my insecurities, and I go deeper and deeper into it. At one point, we have a neighbor who is older than me. He probably was about 16, 17 years old, and we were latchkey kids. And I would let him into our home because he had pornography on a VHS tape.
Oh,
and
wow.
So,
Way to age us, buddy.
I know, right? Yeah, just like, I don't know what you're talking about. What's a VHS? You should have just said that. I have
VHS
no
is
idea.
a big ass tape with like, don't worry about it.
Yeah. So I'm watching this with him while I'm supposed to be taking care of my baby sisters. And part of I would say my trauma with this comes from being so addicted to this that I broke the safety rule. Like my parents were trusting me to take care of my little sisters. So he would come over and we would just watch porn. And then he would, it's just like a male bonding thing, just watching porn. And he's like, that's what this is. That's what it did. That's what women do. And I'm like, okay, cool. I'm learning about this stuff. But then he started leaving the tapes and he was like, keep watching it. I'll let myself out. Turns out he was going into my sister's room and doing things to them. And I had no idea. And this was always in the evening. My parents were in the medical profession, always coming home late. So it wasn't until my sisters leave a little note for me and say, hey, please walk your friend out because he's doing things to us. And mind you, they're very young. They're like, 9, 10 years old.
Oh my gosh.
I'm conflicted. I'm angry. I'm ashamed. And the worst part is the only thing I can do to make me feel better is to go back to the tapes he's left me and keep watching them. And that's the moment that I realize that, well, I don't realize it. In retrospect, I do. That's the moment that I'm stuck in the cycle. That's the only thing I can do to feel better.
And I mean, I get it. It's just, it's like any form of addiction, whether it's food, whether it's alcohol, drugs, sex, porn, whatever it is, we all, these are coping mechanisms that that we find for ourselves based on the environment that we were brought up in, just like you're talking about. Like it's nuts. Like I was also raised in a very, very conservative Christian home. And I was an only child. And I talk about my sister on this show. She's actually, I call her my sister. We're 2 days apart, but she's my sister. But I am an only child. And, I didn't have a sister or a brother to like bounce ideas off or like ask questions or like be curious with. It was just me being curious with myself and being in a split home, going back and forth and all of that. The quote unquote cliche of a divorced, that everybody's freaking from a divorced family. I swear to God, there's far more than not, unfortunately, and dealing with emotions that you're unsure of what they actually are. Like where are these coming up from? We're so young and having to be faced with adult situations and adult decisions that we have to make at such a very young age. Like how, and I talk about it openly on the show, and it's the first time I spoke about it, but when I started my show was talking about when I was raped when I was a little girl. And I never talked about it. My parents still don't know. Like I always tell them, like, if you're going to listen to my podcast, you're going to have some fucking questions. My mom's like, la, 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 I'm good. Let me know when it's a big success and then I might start listening, right? But those past traumas, I've protected the adults in my life for my whole life, starting at such a very young age, at 9 years old. I have protected the adults in my life instead of feeling protected by them. And that is something that I've been working through, even with each episode that I speak with people like yourself, where I'm learning about things about me and triggers are coming out within me. Like even like we were talking about my stepmom, like, whoa, I have not thought about that thought in, I don't even know how long, 30 years. That's insane. So thank you
No,
It's a good thing I'm going away for the weekend because I might need to drink through a little bit of this.
Good timing. I think subconsciously you probably set it up that way.
Maybe. Yeah. And that's what I find so interesting about this process and why I find podcasting to be such an amazing medium for people like you and myself, and of course our listeners, because your show is amazing as well. So here we go. So now you're here and you've discovered this amazing thing in your mind, right? Can you talk about how that has transferred into your adulthood and what you're doing, how you got through it and how you got out of it? And then we'll go from there because your stories are just amazing.
Well, the first time that I realized it was affecting my adult life was when I got to college. And in college, I was trying to date like everyone else. And I just couldn't because I could not view women as the concept of intimacy was completely missing. I had spent thousands of hours just being a spectator in other people's lives. And I tell my clients, like, if you don't think you have a problem with pornography, just remember that you have watched more naked people having sex than every ancestor that came before you. Like you have seen more of them. And that was very difficult because in my mind, everything was a scene. Like you met the woman and for some reason she thought you were hot because you were the plumber or the pizza guy, whatever. And then it sounds funny, but I was a grown man.
No, I know. I mean, I've seen a couple porns.
I was like, well, and of course I came across as a very creepy person. I was giving off super weird vibes way before this because I had no concept of this. And that became very difficult. So I did the next thing. The next best thing was I was like, okay, fine. Where do people get laid, quote unquote? And that was in the bars. So I then picked up a drinking problem because then I would go out, I would drink, I would try to grind. Yeah. I would grind. Now I'm dating. I'm dating myself. God. I'm dating myself. Remember the days when
totally dating yourself, and you're younger than me, motherfucker.
When grinding was a thing,
bump and grind, baby.
Now when you say grind, people are like, "What's grinding?"
That is disgusting.
Yeah, it was disgusting, people. It was disgusting. So I would go out there and I'd try to grind. And grind, it doesn't mean hard work like it means today. I'll tell you that much.
Right. Oh, I got to get back to the coal mines.
No, this is not that kind of grind.
No, it is not.
This was a creepier grind. And I'm ashamed to say I became quite good at it, but it was not a substitute for it. It was not a substitute for intimacy. I would then come back tipsy and I would proceed to watch a lot of pornography to feel better. And then started escalating into acting out behavior. I got to a point of desperation where I would get on Craigslist. And there's so much stuff that's dating myself. I would get on Craigslist. They had these personals and I would try to find sexual partners on there. It all came to a head one evening. I had come back from one of these bars and I was tipsy and I'd watched some pornography as I usually did. I was doing this on a daily basis, every day. And I started a conversation with a woman who was apparently babysitting. And she was like, hey, I'm looking for somebody to have sex with. I'm babysitting and the kids are asleep. I'm 21 years old and everything. Now I have this ear goggles on. I'm in a fog of arousal from pornography. I'm not thinking straight. And I'm like, yeah, sure. And she sends me these pictures and I'm like, okay, this is the deal. It's going to happen. And so I jump in my car and I drive across town to this really messed up neighborhood. I pull up in an alleyway. She gives me directions. And then she's like, I see you. And I'm like, I don't see you. She's like, just turn off the car and come out. And I stopped panicking at that point.
I'm panicking right now.
The only thing that saves me is that I left the car on drive. It was automatic. And I didn't put on the brake or anything. I put my foot on the brake, but it was in drive. And as I'm sitting there, just texting, like, where are you? Am I at the right place? Blah, 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 blah. Somebody smashes my driver's side window. I just feel the glass on the
Whoa.
And I panic. I drop my phone. I hit the accelerator. I drive through a yard. I drive through the fence, through the lawn, and I come out on the other side of the neighborhood. And I speed away. My car is like in pieces. And Lyndsay, I remember just driving back home with my hands on the steering wheel. I twisted the plastic covering it. And I'm driving back and I'm shaking. And I'm saying, JK, you weren't raised like this. You weren't raised like this. You weren't. And I'm driving home in absolute shock. I don't even remember how I got home because I used my GPS to get there, but I don't know how I got home. And I get home and I remember coming in and I realized I had a big problem. I wasn't raised like this. I was a guy who was watching porn. I didn't do anything bad. I wasn't doing drugs. I wasn't doing anything. But I realized in that moment, I could have been on the news the next day. And all of this was because I was chasing sex. I was desperate. My life was sad. I remember just looking at myself in the mirror. I probably weighed about 120 pounds. I'm about 6'1" back then. I remember looking at myself and I was like, everything about you has to change. Like everything. We're not called porn recovery. We're called porn reboot. The concept of recovery is recovering that which you lost. And I did not want to recover any of the things I had been raised with. I didn't want the conservative upbringing. I didn't want the ideology. I didn't want the template. I was done. I was going to recreate myself from the ground up. And that's how the journey of rebooting and healing began for me.
Yeah. And I think I love that whole part about going back because like, okay, take the lessons that we need to learn from our past mistakes and the things that we've done or things that have happened to us. Because it's not just about what we've done. It's things that have happened to us, right? And that we've had no control over. I couldn't control some dude in a park raping me when I was 13 years old. There was absolutely no way that I could control that situation, right? But having looked at it now, I learned some lessons about how I was affected by that event and how because unfortunately, a lot of it was because of the conservative home that I was brought up in. I was not going to talk about it. There's no freaking way. Like to this day, I swear to God, if my mom finds out, she will be in a straitjacket, just shaking back and forth like a crazy person. Like she will not be able to handle it. Not that my mom isn't a strong woman, but she's not like me in the way that like I can dodge punches and get punched and I'm still freaking right back up like those old clowns. Remember, like you just punch the clown, it pops back up.
Comes back
That's
right
me
up.
fucking every goddamn day. But I don't think that my little mom is like that. And so I protected her for so long and protected my dad for so long. And I'm still doing it. But now that I'm at least vocalizing it and talking about it and working through some of that stuff, I don't want to recover from it. I want to move forward from it. And that is a totally different viewpoint. And I love that about you for this because I never even thought of that concept. I mean, I thought about it, but you verbalized it very, very well. So, okay. So now that you're here and you've made your decision, you're like, okay, great. I need to change. This is scary shit. So what did you do?
The first thing I started working on was my habits. Firstly, I couldn't find any example of somebody back in the day who had quote unquote overcome the behavior. There was no one talking about pornography addiction.
No.
It just wasn't a thing.
Yeah.
It was just strange. People were like, yeah, I've heard of sex addicts, but porn addicts? I don't think that's a thing. So I actually just had to figure out a way to do it. And I did the 12-step groups. I did Sex Addicts Anonymous. I went for all sorts of retreats. I was out in California quite a bit, spending money I did not have and a lot of woo-woo stuff. And I will say this, a lot of that was helpful. A lot of it brought self-awareness, but I realized that I did not have a strong foundation for changing my self-image. It had to start with the most basic of habits. And by that, I mean habits with my environment. Like what was I doing when I was online? What was I doing in response to strong emotions? Were there habitual patterns with reactiveness to certain things? So I had to dive deep with that. Changing the habits, the basic habits, not all of them, really helped build a strong foundation. The next thing was I started working with some coaches, but I quickly came to realize that a lot of coaches were really good at teaching the whole habit thing. Habits were not enough. My lifestyle had to change as well. I actually had to become intentional about certain practices, whether it was things like meditation, little things like journaling and learning how to reflect, even some of the exercises we teach within our program, which is one of which is called dialoguing, where you name a subpersonality or you name multiple subpersonalities within yourself, which you use to cope or which come up when you cope or when you become sexual, and learn how to be compassionate with them, learn how to have conversations with them. That became a part of my lifestyle for a long time. And during that time, I needed accountability. If not, I'd just slip back to my old habitual patterns. The lifestyle part was good, but I remember going about 18 months of doing awesome. Things were great. And then I just let everything go one day. I was like, I'm good. I'm back in control of my behavior. And I was right back. It didn't take like 3 weeks. And I was terrified, Lyndsay, because I was also afraid of the 12-step conservative approach where you were told that once an addict, always an addict. and that I would have to do this one day at a time for the rest of my life. And I was scared of being the 60-year-old guy in the circle telling everyone about my black and white, boring life that had all these boundaries, because I truly believed that I could, if I even stopped living this way, I would go back to the behavior. So once that happened, I was like, this is not going to be an excuse for me to start living day by day and none of that. I went back to the drawing board. I started over again. And this time I stopped being so hard on myself. See, prior to this, with my behavior, I was trying to be perfect. It was like, oh, so you had one drink after 5 years, Jim? Well, you fell off the wagon. You've got to begin. You've got to start all over. And I was like, wait a minute. Are you trying to tell me that all the rewiring that happened in my brain, all of that is, all those 3 years of sobriety, I have to throw them out of the window because I had a drink once, because I watched pornography once, because I saw an escort once. And that's the problem with traditional recovery, is there is not enough self-compassion and understanding of the journey. I learned that my slips and my relapses were just data. That's it. I could be emotional about it in the moment, but I could just watch the emotion. Okay, I could label it. I'm like, JK, you're frustrated. JK, you're feeling shame now. JK, you're feeling guilt. And for each of these, like shame, I was like, okay, well, what do I do about the shame? Well, don't keep the shame in the dark, bring it into the light. And I started doing these things habitually. So when I say I went back and I reworked it, I reworked the habits. I started doing things like making it habitual to bring shame into the light. I started doing that over and over. Slips became data. It became progress over perfection. And the funny thing is, when I stopped being perfect, I started shedding all that conservative conditioning, because all of it was really, even though they didn't tell you that, still we wanted you to be perfect, wanted you to be a perfect Christian, a perfect person, your house is a mess on the inside, but you had to go outside to the neighborhood and make it like seem beautiful. And I just started shedding all the perfection over the months and the years that started happening. And in the process, my self-image started changing as I did that. So the system that we have is habits first, lifestyle, and self-image.
That's amazing.
Yeah, I know I sound preachy about it, but I am passionate about it.
No, you don't at all. You don't at all. Like, please, gosh, this man was a preacher, man. He's no, it's you didn't sound preachy at all. And I'm like, I'm not befuddled, because that's one of my favorite words, and I'm not confused. I'm trying to wrap my brain around all of that, because that touches in a lot of different places. And this isn't just in pornography. This is just addiction as a whole and self-esteem as a whole. And I love that, because I'm super OCD. I'm a total perfectionist, and I hate that about okay, Lyndsay, stop that negative self-talk. I don't care for that part of my life, because it actually has gotten me into trouble by trying to be perfect. And I know that sounds like, how is that possible? Because all it did was detrimental things to myself, my relationships, my business, all this, holding all of these people up to these absolutely like off the charts, like levels of, you have to hit all of these marks or I'm never going to be happy. I'm like, whoa, hold on a second. Like you gotta clean your house first before you start pointing things at other people too. But a lot of that comes from trauma. A lot of that comes from shame. A lot of that comes from guilt, where I know for me, if I can be, there's an Alanis Morissette song called Perfect, right? I identify with that song, and that also ages me, but I identify with that song so much, because if I was only perfect, and as a kid, I lived under the guise of, if you do anything wrong, you're going to hell. That's it. These were the messages that were drilled in. You're not allowed to make mistakes. You're not allowed. And shame and guilt and detention and expulsion and suspensions followed because I was always doing the wrong thing, even though I knew I was supposed to be doing the right thing, but I didn't even really understand what the right thing was. It's so convoluted, especially when you're raised like you and I were in conservative Christian environments. It's very challenging to grow up under this veil of shame all of the time. Like, you're never going to be good enough. And I know now that I am good enough. And now I'm like, well, I think part of that is just getting older and being like, I don't give a shit. What? You don't like what I'm doing? Okay, great. That's on you. And that's something I've learned too. And I say this to my sweetie all the time too, is we cannot own how other people are shaping their experience around us. We cannot own how they are going to respond to something that happens in their life or in ours. So if something happens in my world and my mom responds a certain way, I don't own that. I don't own her response and her reaction, how she's going to deal with that. I can't, because that's not fair. But I lived my whole life like that until I would say probably the past 3 years. It's nuts. So how long did it take for you to get to the place that you're at right now? Because obviously, well, maybe obviously is not the right word. I'm assuming that you're not into pornography anymore.
I am not.
That is my assumption.
There are two ways to answer that. I'm not into pornography. It took my entire life to get here. It's an interesting question because my clients want a perfect story. You know, marketing, right? You need to have like the whole hero's journey, and they want to know exactly what it is. And I know you run an agency as well, and you're a marketer. There's this balance that I try to strike. We're very successful at what we do.
Sure.
Where I tell guys that it took me 1.5 to 2 years for me to control my behavior. Now, that's not exactly how long it took. It took me my entire life to do it. But from that moment when I went for 18 months and I slipped, I relapsed, and I went back and I reworked everything, that's when it took 1.5 to 2 years. And then they love to ask, they're like, so when did you know that this wasn't a problem for you anymore? I was like, when I just literally one day, I just realized that I didn't have a filter on my computer, and I just wasn't walking around in fear. I was like, when did you know that you were done wetting the bed? I always ask them, and they're like, I don't know. One day, I guess maybe I must have been about 8 years old, 9 years, 5 years old. I don't know exactly. It's the same thing. And I truly believe that when you work on making something a part of your lifestyle and you're intentional about changing your self-image, it's going to happen organically. There will be moments where you will find yourself in a situation where in the past you would be reactive, and you realize maybe then or later that I wasn't reactive. In my case, I do have a few stories, but one that stands out is being at a party in New York, I believe. And this was in my adventurous phase. Now I'd started working out. I was changing the way I looked. I grew my hair out. I was intentionally creating an avatar that I had created. Everything you see around
well said.
is based on an avatar, like literally a comic book character that I saw in my head. And like a child in my early 20s, I decided I'm going to build this man, including the way I expressed myself, the way I spoke, everything. I remember being at this place. Now I was like, I could get dates. Now I'd learned about intimacy. Now I was actually only engaging in sexual behavior when intimacy was there. If there wasn't any intimacy, I wouldn't do it. I don't know if you know this. There's this author, Mark Manson.
Oh, yes, I do.
Yes. So
his books are behind me.
Okay, excellent. So Mark is born on the same day as I am, same year, I believe. 1984. And he was my coach. So back in the day when Mark was sleeping on his mother's couch in Austin, Texas, he was also a dating coach. And one day he'd read the 4-hour work week, and he was going to up and go to geo arbitrage, and he was going to go to Argentina and work, which was amazing for him because his career took off right after that.
Right, yeah.
And he sends out this email blast, and he's like, guys, I need money to go to Argentina, so I'm going to take a few more in-person coaching clients. It's $2,500, go to Austin and spend an entire weekend with him approaching women. So I flew out there. I didn't have the money, put it on a credit card. I went out there and I worked with him for a long weekend. He would literally make me go up to women, and it was exposure therapy. It was go up to them and just say hello. And then he would just keep critiquing me. And this was just one weekend. We could do hundreds till it got to the point that I was literally walking up in the mall, having conversations with women, going and having a juice with them, walking around the mall, holding their hand, thanking them, and just moving on with my day. Like no intent, no like I'm going to have sex with you, just authentically connecting over and over and over again. Changed my life. I'm out in New York, fast forward a few months later, living this life now that I've learned how to communicate and be intimate. And I'm in a party and they just start playing pornography on a projector.
Oh, shit.
Yeah. And everyone's just cool. Some people are watching. I don't know what this party was trying to become.
I've been to a lot of fucked up places. I've never random porn showing.
Like, what are they trying to do? And I'm standing there and I see it. And there's something far back in my mind that just explodes like, oh, that's porn. But then what follows is pain. I feel sorry for the actors and the actresses. Like I feel compassion. I wouldn't call it sorry or pity. I
No,
felt
I get what
compassion.
you're saying.
Yeah,
Yeah,
I was
I
like,
understand that. Yeah.
they're doing this in front of a camera, and it's not pity as in what would a person have to go through to be so fucked up. No, it wasn't that. It was just that as a species, we have somehow come to a point that we there's still this part of us that enjoys looking at this. Like, look at this situation. These are people well dressed and everyone is casual. Yet we have to satisfy that animal urge by putting it up on a screen. And I just felt so sad. I remember leaving the party and I walked the streets of New York that evening, and it was a realization that, hey, I was not aroused by that.
Well, that's a big moment, right? Where it not shows up in front of you. That's like, walking around with a bunch of vials of Coke to people that are Coke addicts. Like, that's a challenging situation to be put in. But that realization is pretty neat. Where you're like, this actually doesn't do anything for me anymore. That's neat. So then you've got this, and then now you've decided you're going to help other men. And I know we've talked about it on our meet and greet and stuff about like, why is there a difference between so many men using pornography versus women? I don't necessarily know statistically anything about the difference between how many men versus women. I know in my world, it has been more statistically that men have been interested in porn than women, but there are so many women that are in porn. So can you speak a little bit to that, and then how you got into helping these men that were just like you, that need somebody like you in their life?
I think a lot more women are using pornography these days. I think the way that women, again, this is everything I'm going to say from this point on is generalizing. Okay.
Okay. All right.
It's generalizing.
Disclaimer.
It's going to spray, and they're going to be stray bullets, and some people in the audience are going to be, oh my God, what a dick.
You're splashing all over these people.
Yeah. So I'm just going to be shooting. If I hit you with a stray bullet, don't hate me. Don't go to my podcast and leave a negative review. Just know that the man is just generalizing. Okay. I love you all. And support me, Lyndsay.
Oh my God, JK.
Anyway, generally speaking, what I found is that women's response to pornography, it varies across the board. I find that women are a lot more open to it. I find that they can enjoy it in different ways. In fact, it was interesting. In my early dating phase, before I got into a relationship, I would find that there were women who would enjoy all sorts of pornography. I'd seen women who enjoyed lesbian pornography. And a few months later, they were like, I just like watching videos of men masturbating. I was like, that's it? She's like, yeah, that's what I'm into now. And I realized, okay, the arousal template of women in general is a lot more varied than men's.
Oh, I would think so.
Yeah. And I think it's a very interesting. Yet there is one thing I must say. This does not make women immune from the negative impact of pornography. Unfortunately, because a woman's arousal template, generalizing, is a lot more varied, she's also likely to get addicted or get compulsive with behavior that absolutely cannot be replicated by a man, or a man with a normal sized penis. And that's the reason why since the pandemic, there are all kinds of sex toys that have come out. There are dragon dildos. There's like a whole Game of Thrones themed thing. There's all kinds of crazy things. And there are women now who simply cannot orgasm with a man. Doesn't help that there are a lot of men who now view sex as something performative because they've watched pornography for so long. So for them, it's always the women who say like, oh man, this guy I'm with, it's almost as if he's not there with me. He's no longer present. Yeah. But that's because he's performing, because he thinks like that woman who is gushing all over the place on Pornhub or whatever. He thinks that it's what the guy's doing that's making her do that. He has no idea what her arousal template is. He has no idea how much drugs are involved in that it is not normal to have sex for 3 hours straight every single time. They're grown men who really think this. And they have all these issues with it. So that's all I'm going to say about it. Let's just tie it up in a bow and say that women's arousal template is a lot more varied. Sometimes they haven't addressed a lot of trauma for the same reasons that you brought up. They're still subconsciously, in some cases, protecting someone or something. And until they've really dealt with those things, it's very difficult to fully embrace the impact of pornography on their life. Some of them are using it to medicate, and some of them are using sex to regain power over something that they've lost, which is not really the case with men. With men, it's a lot more clear cut.
So from that, and thank you for speaking about the women part of it, because I wanted to touch on that for sure in our conversation. But so now you're here and you're working with men. So what are you doing for the men of this planet right now to help them through this and to help change their brains, because it is a lot of retraining of your brain and a lot of habitual things that, need to be changed and things like that. How are you helping the men of this world?
Well, we're using our system, first of all, habits, lifestyle, and self-image. But it's interesting that you should ask this now, because over the past couple of weeks, I've noticed that there's been this trend towards a lot of pornographic material becoming mainstream. Pornography is not really a noun anymore. It's more of a verb. Pornography is something that's being done to society. It's become incredibly commoditized, OnlyFans being an example. And as a result, just human sexual dynamics have changed. And I'm finding a lot of men coming to me, and I'm realizing that their dating issues are completely different. So now we have young men who are trying to date women, but these women also have a sugar daddy. And it's becoming quite normalized because I'm just finding a lot of men who deal with that. I'm finding men who are dating women, and now they're starting to screen them to find out if they have an OnlyFans first.
Whoa.
Yeah, these changes that I've learned over the 11 years of coaching men to pay attention to them, because if they're happening with my clients, it's only a matter of time before you start seeing articles normalizing this.
Oh, for sure.
Bringing it up.
Yeah.
So that's a change that's happening. And of course, we adapt to work with the men. But I've come to realize that it's not a war. I'm not battling the porn industry. I do believe the porn industry, what it has become right now, is very, very harmful. It's harmful. It is degrading. It supports sexual exploitation. It supports the sex trafficking industry, and it causes it to grow. Don't get me wrong. There is a time and a place for pornography. I have clients who come to me and they say, hey, man, I've been listening to your podcast and I'm starting to wonder, maybe I have a porn addiction. I'm like, we actually have a quiz on our website. I was like, take the quiz. They're like, yeah, I took the quiz and it says I don't have a problem, but man, I really like sex. And I was like, dude, just because you watch some pornography, even if you watch it every week, and when you decide to stop, you can stop whenever you want to. It doesn't mean you're a bad person. Or just because you have a specific fetish. That's the thing with fetishes. A lot of people show up and they're like, I have a fetish and I found it in porn and I feel dirty. Like the problem with fetishes is that, well, first of all, fetishes are a normal part of human behavior. The only problem is that we are so afraid of what people would think of us if they knew what our fetish is. And the result of that, it brings up shame. Yeah. That shame causes you to multiply that shame, because the porn industry knows what you watch. They are the kings of marketing. Before any marketing concept online becomes mainstream with any agency, the porn industry has the data to test it. They come up with everything. Yeah,
because they can.
They can manipulate human behavior. They can watch
absolutely.
They're like, what are the people in Utah watching? They're like, okay, fine. You know what we're going to do? We know where this is headed.
Well, isn't the Mormon church like the porn center of the world?
Yeah, pretty much. We know they're going to end up watching gay Mormon missionary porn. And they're like, we're going to create that. So they literally create that. I shot a video the other day. Now I'll circle back to this, but I wanted to mention this. I shot a video the other day, and this was on gender. The proliferation of what's called sissy pornography, which is basically straight men dressing up in women's lingerie, and then progressively getting to the point that they identify as women, and how some individuals in the trans community are not happy with this, because these men are viewing this pornography and they view it to the point that it rewires their brain. They begin to identify as women, and some of them even start taking hormones. Now, this can sound out there. It really can sound out there when you hear it. But when you receive over 200 emails a day like me, and you keep getting like 4 or 5 of these every day, you realize there's just a whole nother world out there. So it sounds like fringe stuff, but it really isn't. But what we do for men at the end of the day is we provide a safe place for them to come in and express themselves. A lot of our clients have never spoken to a therapist. They've never spoken to anyone. I've had many people try to give me marketing advice on how I should present my podcast. But the reason people come is because we try to be as wildly authentic as we can. We're open, we're raw. We talk about what it means to be a man. And there's no topic that I will not address. I will talk about everything. And I tell my clients there is nothing that you have gone through or you have experienced that I have not just experienced myself, but I have not had a client out of our thousands of clients.
Right, like nothing's going to shock you.
who's gone through it. But you also have a discreet community. Discretion is very important as well, where you can show up and say, hey, I have this weird fetish, or I stepped out on my wife, or the FBI, today we got somebody, the FBI just raided their home. The FBI just raided me, and now I'm under investigation. And you have a place where men will raise their hands and say, hey, the same thing happened to me. And yes, you're probably going to lose everything, at least because your reputation is already gone. But it's okay. Here's what I did, and here's how I got out of it. And this is what my life is like. So it's a safe space for men to express themselves, to begin the process of healing. And we also provide a lot of resources after that. Once you're rebooting and you hit that reset button, sometimes you need to relearn sexuality. So I'm not the only coach. I'm the head coach. We have a trauma-informed coach. We have a life coach. We have a neuro reprogramming coach. So if some traumatic issues from the past come up, we also address that. All of this with one very simple goal. When you leave our program, we want you to know that you are in control of your behavior. And despite the fact that we have coaches and I have experience, I truly believe that you are the best expert at yourself. Like, we can support you, we can guide you, but at the end of the day, no one's going to spoon feed you. It's a little bit of tough love, but we want you to be able to be dependent on yourself moving forward.
I love that. I love the spoon fed part of it, because everyone's like, well, I'm just going to go in there and everyone's just going to, handle me with kid gloves and they're going to make me feel all warm and fuzzy. No, guys, like, that's not going to fix anything. This has been so eye-opening in so many places, in so many ways. And I applaud you for getting through what you've done and what you've been through, and that you're helping others. And on his podcast, the Porn Reboot podcast, he speaks with, he doesn't just talk about the industry, but he talks about finances, and he talks about growth, and he talks about our emotions and all of that. But he also talks about with other people that have rebooted, and they are vulnerable, and they're coming on and they're sharing their stories. And it's wonderful that these people are coming forth and sharing their stories, not unlike people on this show as well. So thanks for doing that, because it's pretty awesome what you're all about.
I appreciate it, Lyndsay. And I actually want to take a moment to thank you for just being a curious human being. I don't know if people give you enough credit for it, and you haven't shared too much, but you're a busy person. You do a lot in life. And I feel that, and you're also working on yourself. And the energy I get from you is you go from one thing to the other, but you seem to have this capacity to feel pain while being busy, while interviewing, while doing stuff. And I think it's phenomenal. And I just appreciate you as a human being for just being able to live with this. I don't know what that's like, but just want to acknowledge that.
Thank you. And thank you for making me tear up right now, because I was good the entire episode. It's my first episode where I did not cry until the very end. Thank you. I do appreciate it. And it's about showing up, man, and the thing that drags me out of my bed when I'm in the worst pain on the planet is doing this damn show. It is my soul food, and it is me meeting people like you and having conversations today with someone as wonderful as you are, that make it worth all of it. So
thank you. I just wanted you to, you kept asking me questions.
Are you affirming me right now?
I was like, give me a chance to love you. But you just kept going from question to question. I was just like, I just want to appreciate the person.
Well, thank you so much for your time today. And we definitely are going to do a part 2, because I think that this is an absolute need to have these conversations, and to not feel shamed, and to not feel guilty, and know that there is hope. And there's so many levels and layers to all of this that come from our early onset childhood trauma stuff to things that may have happened to you yesterday. So don't beat yourself up. Where can we find you, my darling?
You can find me, first of all, YouTube is one of the best places to find me. Just look for my name, JK, last name Emezi. Our website is elevatedrecovery.org. And my podcast is the Porn Reboot podcast. Now, when you Google me, you'll see a lot of people called Porn Reboots coming up in the last couple of months. Don't just avoid all of them. We have to trademark on that, and I'm suing all of them. I just want to. I'm suing. I've been doing this for 11 years, so we were the first. We were doing it, but Porn Reboot podcast. Please feel free to send me messages. We've got a wonderful free private Facebook group. We don't pitch you anything in there. We really don't. I tell guys and girls, or if you've got a male partner who's a porn addict, send him over and he can spend a year or 2 years in our group, just getting to learn about this and becoming comfortable with it. We would love to have it.
That's awesome. And please do so, guys. And I'll put all of this in show notes and in social and all of that stuff. Or we've got his website and his podcast and his TikToks and all of that. His social media. Can you speak really quick about social media? Because I know that we talked about your handles changing a little bit.
Yeah, so my handles change all the time because social media thinks that we are pornography. So sometimes just one wrong hashtag will get our Instagram dumped. So right now we actually do not have an